Hello, hello there. It's the morning. It's morning over here. So once again, it's an honor to be speaking with you. And if this is your first time, I would say welcome. I don't believe in coincidences. So I believe that you are here for a reason. My name is Ryan, um, and welcome to Behind Closed Doors. Today, I would I'll be talking about lessons lessons from a dad because like I mentioned the last time, um, my dad passed away on the 2nd of May, but he was interred um, last weekend, and unfortunately I couldn't make it. I would have loved to have been there, but it just wasn't logical. I wasn't even able to get a fit to fly certificate, and then factoring in the cost of traveling, having to go with someone, and for that kind of a trip would have been way, way, way expensive. And right now I'm trying to make every cent count. So yeah, this is for him. You probably can't tell, but I just got back from the hospital. Um, another visit. I was saying, I don't know who I was talking with, and I told the person that my life has been reduced to a series of and unending hospital visits, and hopefully, someday it would also be a story that I'll tell. You probably wouldn't know, but right now it's pouring, and I just want to appreciate Sean, who brought me home, who was super kind. I want to appreciate Morgan and Gregoria. Um, they were the ones who looked after me while I was at the hospital, and they were really nice, super nice, super nice. Um, yeah. So the last video, I think I kind of aired when I gave scriptural reference. I was actually referring to Matthew 6, not Romans 8, Matthew 6. And I was trying to drive home the point that worry really doesn't solve anything. It, on the contrary, it just makes things worse. And if things are bad, like they are for me, worrying just makes it worse. And I was I, wa- I was blessed to have been tasked with creating um, a site for him, where people could go read about his life, and you know, drop drop a tribute, leave a note, or leave a story, um, and going through some of the tributes, it drove home the fact that, number one, we're all imperfect, and but we ought to aspire to be Um, as close to perfection, not really, but we should always strive to be better than we were, and I think that really captures my dad. Again, I've learned that it's in our passing. It's after we're gone that how we lived our lives, it really comes to the fore. Yeah, because it's a life is a journey, and it's as is the case with journeys, you encounter people, and really it's the impact you had on their lives that you came across that really gives them a synopsis into the kind of person you were. And yeah, I'm going to borrow the words of a loved one, reading her tribute, and she said this. She said, kindness, over an extended period of time, kindness becomes less of a gesture. It becomes an expression of who you are. And I can say my dad was, I tell people I don't know. I find some questions difficult. Like who was your role model growing up, and if ever there was anybody that I would assign that huge role to, without thinking, I would say my dad, because he was just even with his imperfections, he was just a kind man, and he loved us as he knew how to. I sit here today, and I celebrate the life he lived, because without him, without his guidance, I wouldn't be half the person I am today. Because most of what I learned, and who I've become, was gotten from being around him. And for some reason, whenever he had to travel to do, for work, he was a telecommunications engineer. He retired as a telecoms engineer. He always used to go with me, and just watching him work made me understand how important hard work was. And my dad was blessed with wisdom. He wasn't very talkative, but he was fun to be with. He was fun to be around, because he had these moments where, just before life turned sour, you know, where he would dance. He raised us up on country music, Don Williams and ABBA, um, were his go-to. And I remember growing up when he would just, bust into a dance. He had this really funny way of dancing. Um, but now he's gone. It's all that I'm left with. In addition to the vacuum, the lessons I learned from him, some directly and some indirectly. He loved quotes. He loved philosophy, and he taught me that the most important question in life was why. Um, and he used to say then, that success was 99% hard work, was 99% perspiration and 1% inspiration. And growing up until you become a young adult, that's when you finally appreciate the role your parents played. And my dad was strict. He was strict, was a disciplinarian. He didn't believe in cutting corners. In fact, another quote I learned from him was that shortcuts aren't the best in life because they are usually always under construction. And so, in a bid to take a shortcut, you would end up just spending more time. So why don't you just put in the work and you know go the normal route. Don't cut corners. But just watching him work, he would get so absorbed in his work that he would forget about eating. And it's a habit. It's a bad habit that I'm trying to break. He'll get so absorbed in his work that he would forget about eating. And the first thing he would always do was he would clean. He would clean. He would say that most issues are caused by dirt, not death, but dirt. You know, because the longer you allow, the longer again, there's that saying that cleanliness is next to godliness, and he kind of epitomized that, and he would always say, before you do anything, try and get rid of the dust, try and get rid of the dirt, because as long as there's dirt, it's going to hinder the flow of good. It's going to hinder the flow of air. It's going to cause the buildup of cobwebs, which is something that really affects electronics. He would always clean. That was the first thing he would do. um, and I sit here today, and I celebrate him because the last 2 years of his life, he struggled. It was a long exhausting battle with dementia, and it was really sad, and it was really sad and annoying, just watching the man whose laughter was a joy to hear, and whose counsel was just invaluable. Just to watch him, you know, reduced by ill health to a state where he became bedridden. Because his body just couldn't take it anymore, and he spent the last 2 years, bedridden and not even knowing where he was, and it was. Yeah, I'm gonna try and make this. You know, it was just another example of understanding the things that really matter in life. Because I remember how the vitality he exuded. How he loved to impact people. Our house was we were never alone growing up. There were always relatives, people, and I can say that my dad was a wise man. And wisdom sometimes, it's about hearing the things you need to hear, not the things you want to. And I'm just going to share a little bit, some of the memories fun memories that I have of him. Um, I remember, I remember, When I graduated from the university, um, I chose not to go home. So I spent the year working. I lived with a friend. Um, you know, he's more than a friend. Actually, he's now a brother. Um, we're roommates in freshman year and sophomore year, and then we went separate rooms. I moved out of um, the temporal site, which is where most of the hotels were located. Most of the hostels were located because I needed to work on my grades because again he would say focus on the substance and leave the shadow. And I remember then when I'll be getting ready to go to school. He would say, don't go with too many clothes. you know um and it was kind of it was kind of super important, understanding some of the things he said and why he said them, because again, we're defined by, I think it's Pastor Rick Warren, who said, our lives, can be summarized by the acronym SHAPE. Where S is for our spirituality, H is our heart, A is our attitude, P is our personality, and E is our experiences. And so, coming from very humble backgrounds, I could understand when he would say, just go with 2 pairs of trousers and 4 shirts, and he would justify it by saying, if you go with too many clothes, having to choose what you'll wear would take your time. And it was true, but again, he came from really humble beginnings, and so he didn't have as many clothes as we did, or as I did. But I learned the importance of prioritizing. um, I remember when I gained admission into high school, because my dad was super. He was, education was super important to him. It was super important to him, and he would say that the traveling, because he traveled a lot. Traveling is the best form of, it is the cheapest form of education any man can give himself. And so education was super important to him. He didn't play, and he was really involved. He was really involved in our education. And I remember this moment. I think I was 9, and I gained admission into high school. And back then, they would gather all the applicants, and they would begin to call out names. And so we got there. We got there kind of late. The hall was already full, and then my name was called, and he was way back. He was way back at the end of the room, and he was like, yes, yeah, and I was. And to me, it was embarrassing, because it was like, what, you're bringing attention to me. But that was just how he valued it. Um, and so all through high school, he was always there. And I recall at one point he challenged us, and that was only one time he did it. And then I think I was in my third year, so that would be middle school. No, no, that would be junior high. And he said, whoever had the best result would win a prize. And and I'm super competitive, and so I had two other brothers, to as my rivals, and so I put my nose to the grind, and I won the prize, and it was my first wristwatch. It was a bracelet wristwatch. It was a Seiko wristwatch, and back then it was really expensive. And I remember him handing it to me and saying, you don't have to wait for prizes to bring out your best. What happened to the watch? It's another story again about juvenile stupidity. Because he told me, he said, don't ever take the watch. Why would you take this kind of watch? I mean, he didn't even need to tell me. I could tell it was expensive, and so taking it to high school was just dumb. But back as teenagers, you want to be like the cool kid. And so I wore the watch to school one day, and a classmate of mine decided to find out how it was working, and that was how the watch went bad. But that was just him. He would tell me, hey, come read the papers to him. And in reading the newspapers, that helped my communication, and the way I speak, and the way I write when I can. Um, he was there every time you needed counsel. I needed counsel. I would go to him, and even while we were in university, or while I was in university, he made it a point of duty to check in on us, and he wasn't checking to find out if I was doing the right thing. He just wanted to know that I was there, and that he was there. And while I was in the university, I was part of a Christian fellowship, and because of being a member of fellowship, I was eventually, um, what's the word, elected to lead a unit, and that was the publicity or decoration unit, and which involved graphics and all that. And I already had a flair for that. And we had a studio where um, would have meetings, to prepare, the backdrop for the fellowship, the pictures, to arrange the hall and all that, and to teach new members, and and when I got elected, it was a huge deal to me, because I knew this was just another opportunity for me um, to touch the world, touch the society I lived in. And a few times he came to see me. He would go to my hostel, and I wouldn't be there. And back then there were no phones, there were no cell phones. There were pay phones, but there were no cell phones. And then he would come to the publicity wing room, and he would see me there, working, and he would tell me, I hope this thing is not interfering, because your primary goal, your primary goal is. I said yes. He said, so you need to balance things out, and I did. I did. Um, yeah, but and so after I graduated, I didn't go home, because then my parents' relationship had hit a rough patch. It was a series of wrong patches, long drawn out. But he stayed there. He stayed in, and he said he wouldn't leave. He wouldn't leave the family home, until we're all done. Until all of us had finished the university, because he said it was his, that his duty, his obligation towards his kid as a dad was would stop at us getting our first degree, bachelor's. And if you wanted to, further, it would be on your own dime. And he, he stuck with it. And so when I graduated, I made a decision not to go home because I just was tired. I didn't want to, you know, get involved with, just trying to mediate. You know, I saw how he loved my mom, and how he wasn't ashamed to make her a better version of who she was when they met. And that was just him. He esteemed other people higher than himself. He had 6 kids, and he was a father to many. Because he came from a polygamous setting, and so there were lots of cousins. Well, he had a half brother, just one half brother, who had over 40 kids, and he was always referred to as the one who lived in the city. And of course, whenever he took us home, that was how we were referred to. We were referred to as the kids who lived in the city. Yeah, but he taught me how to appreciate the little people, because the truth is, people don't care how much you know until they know how much you care. And he would always stop to say hi to the doorman, to the cab guy. If we took a cab, he would say hi to the newspaper vendor. This any office he visited, the receptionist knew him, the secretaries knew him, the drivers knew him. And because he told me this. He said, when you appreciate the little people, they're the ones who know what's going on in an organization. And when you appreciate them, there's nothing like letting someone like a janitor, who in most organizations, and in several parts, in almost everywhere in the world, they're just like, flies on the wall. People work there for years and they don't even know the names of the janitors. But my dad would make it a point of duty to know their names, and he would ask not just about them, he would ask about their families and all that. And I could see how much it, how much of loyalty was a big thing for him. He didn't pursue it. He just got it, by virtue of his leadership, and the people he worked with. I could tell how much they always wanted to bring the best out. And our home then used to be a counseling center, because whenever they had marital issues, they would always come to our house. And so he wasn't a boss. He wasn't a leader. One of his role models was, amongst his role models was Mahatma Gandhi of India, and then Mother Teresa. These are people who thought about other people, other lives, much more than they cared about themselves. And I know, having such a large brood, children are expensive. It's even more expensive now. But back in the days, cousins would come in. He would talk to them, and tell them what to do. Predominantly, most of my paternal cousins, they really didn't value education, and so they would have them come over to our house, and they would spend some time there, and he would put them in school. And the least they would get, most of them was high school diploma before they went into business. um, and I, for one, I never saw my dad wear a wedding band, not once. And never did I see him talk inappropriately, or flirt with a lady. It just you know it just it just wasn't him. you know um and he would say, so when just as we grow up, as we became teenagers, you know well, I guess that's something that's going to be associated with me. Growing up, teenage pressure, the urge to carry girls, and his response to that was this quote: "Beautiful ones are not yet born," meaning that you don't. Tomorrow would always come, and with tomorrow, there's always the hope of better things. So why do you want to rush and spend your tomorrow today? And that also helped me in my resolve to stay sexually inactive until I got married. Yeah, but one of the times, one of the memories that I have of him was, like I said, when I graduated from the university, I didn't go home. I chose to spend time with a friend and help with their business. And so he came around to visit me again. That was my dad. He came to visit me, and he told me, he said, "You know what? You know what? Since I had you as a child, you've done two foolish things." And and my dad and I had this relationship that was, it was really envied by many. I know, back as a freshman, in my freshman year, when he would come visit me, with my roommates. There was one of them who he told me, he said, "I love the relationship you have with your dad, because I could tell my dad anything." It didn't bother him that he was in the room, university room. It didn't bother him at all. And he'll talk, and talk not just to me, but to other people around. And we'll crack jokes. And this chap came to me, after he had gone, after he had left one of the visits. He told me, "Whoa, I love the relationship you have with your dad." And there's this saying that the true value of something is not realized until it's lost. And he's not lost because his legacy lives on. The path he led us, or he made us choose. It's the path that has made us who we are. He was very, for him, faith was important. Spirituality was important, even though he was Roman Catholic. Every morning we would wake up then, of course, with the lash of the whip. Wake up by 5 a.m., and then we'd have to say the rosary. And this was during school. This was it's normal school week. And then sometimes, some weekends, he had a farm somewhere. That was the thing about my dad. He just had many caps, many caps. He taught me how to knot a tie. But then he also loved farming. And I used to dread those days, those weekends, Saturdays. There was nothing like sleeping in my home. Come on, sleep what? Every day we wake up the same time. It wasn't important if it was a public holiday or if it was a weekend. And I used to dread the times when he would wake us up and he would say with a smile, "Hey, we're going to farm." Gosh, and we would go and he would teach us, myself and my elder brothers. He would teach us, he would apportion us, what to do, weeding, digging, digging mounds, planting stuff. And so he was a hands-on parent, and that's something I got from him. With my kids, I'm hands-on. I know their teachers. I know the principal. For my daughter, well, she's an adult now, and she's in a different city. So I I can't know her adults. I can't know her teachers. Only those she introduces me to. He also taught me how not to be an helicopter parent, hovering over your children. He taught me how to raise up a child and let the child, grow into his or her own self. And so the year after I graduated from the university, he told me. He said, since I gave birth to you, since I birthed you, you've done two foolish things. And that this was the way I related with him. And I said, just two. And then I was 22. I was 22. And I said, please tell me, what are the two foolish things? I said, but two isn't bad. I was expecting, two isn't bad. Foolish things in growing up as a kid, you know, going to university without your parents being there, which is, college now is the time where kids go there and they believe that now they are they are free from the guidance and the watchful eyes of the parents. And it's from my dad that I learned that freedom isn't the absence of war. It's the presence of peace and the ability to choose. And so I said, please, pray tell me, what are the two foolish things? And he said, okay, number one. I said, number one, um, I baptized you. I had you baptized as a kid, as is the way we Catholics. It's baptism by sprinkling. As a child, you don't even know what's going on. And so when I got into university, yeah, and I joined the fellowship, I did the baptism by immersion, and I took pictures and I told him because I told him I used to tell my dad everything, and I told him, and my dad had a way of holding on to stuff. He was very good with events. I mean, it was annoying. It was annoying because he would bring up stuff that you had forgotten. Um, and he said the first foolish thing that I had done, by his own assessment, was that he had gotten me baptized as a dad, and then I on my own went and got baptized again. I said, okay, fair, that's fine. We can always differ. And then I said, okay, what's the second thing? He said, the second thing is you are here serving a man who didn't contribute a kobo or a dime to your education. And I said, okay, well, but that's my choice. Yeah, he came to see me where I was in a different city. Came to see me, came to check on me. Uh, You know, I also remember another time, and this happened when I was much younger. I went with him on another business trip, and I think it was a case of food poisoning. And that night, I just, you know, I had dysentery, I had running, bowel movement, and I think I saw myself. And my dad, he got up. He didn't rebuke me at all. He helped me clean up the sheets, air the mattress. He never, till he passed, he never ever mentioned it. And so when I tell people that I feel guilty, because I remember when I was helpless, and he stepped up and he took care of me. And now that he was helpless, there was really nothing I could do. And yes, people have said, "Hey, you don't hold on to it. If you had the means, but you already have this medical condition." But that was who my dad was. He taught me that leading is service. You don't lead from, yes, you lead from the front, but you lead by example. And I'm grateful to him. I'm grateful to him. I know he's proud, and he wasn't one to he wasn't too arrogant to apologize to anyone. And after, when he learned of um, the first first marriage and the way things turned out, he was devastated. He was devastated, especially when he knew what happened, because I didn't tell anyone. Kind of reserved when it comes to things like that. He was devastated by it, because he said something. He said, "Oh," and here he was thinking that he had a bad marriage, and I'll never forget it. And I remember him, speaking to both of us, and he apologized, and he said, if there's any way, the failings and shortcomings in his own marital relationship affected me, because yeah, they did. It just I just don't show it. But as a kid, watching your parents go at it, it's something you don't forget easily. But even then, he apologized. He apologized for the effect that the rough times, the bad aspects of his marital relationship turned out, the effect he had on me. He apologized to me. That was who my dad was. Um, he wasn't just patriotic. He showed it. He wasn't just a gentleman. That was the life he lived. He wasn't he wasn't just an engineer. He was a mentor, not just to us as kids, but to so many that passed through our home, so many. And I'm glad that we my siblings were able to bury him, with the dignity that he deserved. But it's something that I would continue to live on, because now he's gone. All that I'm left with is, the memories and the legacies, the lessons he taught me. just just a torrent of memories, just a torrent, just so many, and I hope, and I hope, and I believe that he was proud. He was proud of me. And when I fell ill, I tried to number another instance of the kind of person my dad was when my ex was diagnosed, when she was diagnosed with HIV, she hid it from me for 6 months, and so I just assumed that because we're still intimate, I just assumed my dad was patient. He was patient, man. He was patient, and he was long suffering, and I just don't know how. I just don't know how he could be that way. And it's remarkable because in later years, especially when I was diagnosed, he would tell me, I don't know where you got the strength from, because I don't know how I would handle things. It was from him that I learned never to say, I know how you feel, or if I were you, this is what I would have done. It was from him. You don't do that, because the indices, and they just don't add up. They just don't add up. And when he found out that she had HIV, he told me to go do the test, and I told him it's pointless. I said, because I already have it. I haven't spent 6 months with her. I already have it. And he insisted. He said, listen, let's just know. So, and that was my dad. That was my dad. He would have issues, and he would take it upon himself. I remember this instance when my kid brother was learning how to drive, and he had this bad crash. Well, it wasn't bad. It wasn't bad, but it was, every automobile crash is bad. And the first thing he did, his first concern was having him take an MRI, just to be sure that nothing, because I don't think he had a seatbelt on, and so he kind of broke the windshield with his head. That was the first thing my dad was concerned about, his well-being, not even the state of his car, or the state of the other vehicle that my brother ran into. And unfortunately, my kid brother ran into a chap who was driving a Mercedes Benz, and this was mid 90s, because I know we had moved to our own home then. But it was a very, very, very expensive car, and the person, even though it was already beat up, but the person wanted his car replaced, which was where would the money come from? Where would the money come from? And I remember my dad trying to, because we knew the family, growing up in Warri was a small place. You knew yourselves. Either you went to school with person's brother, or so I knew the family. And my dad tried reasoning with this young man, and the guy refused. He said no, he wanted the car replaced. My dad even went as far as going to see his priest, going to the church he attended, talking to the priest, and the priest talking to this chap, and the chap refused. But eventually he conceded and said, okay, that we needed to fix it. And I can recall I was upset. So this was it. I was upset that my kid brother here was driving recklessly. But that was it. In fact, when he said it's important that he goes to check, I was angry. I'm like, see I was looking at the damage his actions had caused. My dad was looking at the welfare of his son first. And I remember how, little by little, my dad would go spend money, buy parts until we're able to fix this guy's car. That was just an example of who my dad was. Before I went into college, he sat me down and he said, what do you want to do? And I told him, I want to be an engineer, but not an electrical engineer, because I remember all the times I had been almost electrocuted. So I wasn't going to go anywhere near telecommunications, even though I knew basically how to solder and all that. But I told him I wanted to read chemical engineering, and he said, okay, that's good. He said, but let's look at the viability. And this was what early this was early 90s. He said that let's look at courses that that are very back then were in high demand. And I was very good. Like I said, I was very good with graphics. I used to draw. Something I'm even thinking about, if I can do it now, going back to it. But it was through him I loved how to, of course, with my mom's rule about learning a skill. It was through him I was able to, I never asked for a dime more than he was able to give me when I was going to school, because I was using pictures to supplement that. And I never once asked for more. It was through him I learned how to register a business, and I remember working with him after he opened his own companies. Working with him to submit tenders. I was in school then, but I knew so much more than my peers knew. Why? Because my dad would always get me involved. When I'd come home, for breaks, which I rarely did, I would help him, put together, working on the financial aspect, the technical aspect, and I was just, then kids are like sponges, and so I was just soaking all this in. Unfortunately, it didn't work out. But he picked himself up. He picked himself up, and he still continued, doing the little he could do. My dad was the kind of person who when we moved into our family house, the road wasn't hard. And my dad is the kind of person, or was the person, who would wake up in the morning and go walk the length of the street, knocking on the doors of people he didn't know. And why was he doing that? He was trying to see how he could get the community to develop the road. And everybody on that street knew my dad. And I know how many times, he was literally insulted. People would ask him, how does that concern me? But he persevered. So I learned perseverance through my dad. I learned how to be resilient. I learned how to make goals. I learned how to prioritize stuff. I learned how, and most importantly, I learned how to be a good dad. Not just a father, but to be a dad. Because there's a difference. There's a world of difference between being a father and being a dad. And even though he's gone now, my daughter asked specifically for a photograph that she took with him, and she was just 4. Um, we went to see him. We went to visit him, um, and he didn't have his shirt on, and he was eating, I think, biscuit and granite, and my daughter joined him, and that's the so I took a photograph of them, and that's the photograph my daughter was asking for. So even then, kids don't remember. No, my daughter was what? She was 3. Yeah, she had just turned 3. But that's the picture she remember. That's the memory she has of her granddad. You know, and I know, how he felt like he failed me when my daughter was abducted, because I left her with him, but there was nothing he did all he could, but I wasn't on ground, because if I was on ground it wouldn't have happened. But he just, every time, every time I went through a rough patch, when I was doing business, I remember setting up my first, establishing my first company, and then he had retired, and I told him, I said, I'm going to make you the chairman of my board. And he said, okay, thank you. That was him. He said, thank you. I said, well, it's not thank you. I'm going to make you work, because I don't believe in you just folding your hands and thinking, oh, who is me? Because we all tend to do that once in a while. And I told him, I said, it's not that, I'm going to make you work. And he said, well, if you're going to make me work, then I don't want it. Yeah, but I made him chairman of my company, and he brought priceless suggestions, and so I pray that he's, I know he was proud of me. I know how devastated he was, when I was diagnosed. And then another thing about my dad was, when I was ill, all the travels I didn't tell anyone, because, and I refused to talk with him, because I knew that back then you can tell, if you know me, you can tell from my voice when I'm having a bad day. And so anytime he called, I would avoid the call and I would send him a text. But there was this one time he called, and I don't know, I think he insisted he spoke with me, and he heard my voice, and he said, what's wrong with you? And I said, well, it's nothing. And I kid you not, we had this conversation, in the night. I think it was like 9 p.m. And my dad was in a different state, several hours away. And after that phone call, the next morning, by 6 a.m., my dad was at my gate. And he stayed with me for 2 months. My dad had never driven an automatic transmission, but he learned how to using my car, because he was the one who was taking his granddaughter to school, picking her up, taking her for her ballet classes. That was him. There was nothing that he felt was beneath him. And the pride he exuded was one that wasn't putting people down. It was helping and celebrating the success of those that had built up. And so this is my charge to you. If your parents are still alive, or your dad is still alive, and you guys are whatever it is, the Bible says, honor your father and your mother in the Lord, and you have long life and all that. except he's done real bad, but just try and because right now I miss him bad. I miss him bad because there's so many things that I would love to have asked his opinion about, and past 2 years I just couldn't. I remember I had I had a video call with him because, like I said, for 2 years he struggled. He kept hanging on to something, and doctors said they didn't know what he was hanging on to. And because I was super close to him, I called because he spent his last days with my kid brother, who I would also applaud because it wasn't easy. It wasn't easy at all. And so I told his wife, I want to speak with him alone. And so she was able to rig video call. And so I spoke with him for about an hour. And at one point, I know he was trying to smile. And at another point, he was trying to touch the screen. So I know he was hearing me. But that was the last conversation I had with him. But I'll never forget it. I'll never forget it. I'll never forget who my dad was. I'll never. Because he would always say this, that a man is a failure if his kids are no better than him. And he succeeded in not just raising 6 adults to become professionals in their careers and successful. Well, mine is on debate. I'm waiting for God. But before then, I hustled really bad. I had a lot. I had everything going for me until this hit me. So, Dikachuku, I just want to say thank you. Don't just be a father, be a dad. Because as parents, we're just caretakers. We've been given this gigantic task of molding lives, and if we get it wrong, it's going to affect generations. My dad wasn't one who balked, who ever stopped learning. I mean, in his 60s, he learned how to drive a vehicle, automatic transmission. That just tell you who my dad was. And I celebrate him, and I'm thankful to God for having someone like him. So I'm gonna call it. Yeah, I'm gonna wrap this up. It stopped raining. I'm gonna wrap this up, and thank you for those who subscribed. I know I said the goal was to hit 50 subscribers by the end of May. And I looked at it and I don't think we're there yet. So please, don't just watch the videos. I guess one of the reasons I've not been sharing it to my other social media platforms, but just a lot has been going on, so I think I'll do that. But I know more people, there'll be more views, but please don't just watch the video. Please subscribe. It's gonna help me. It's gonna help me because I'm doing this not just because I want to talk, but because I know that there's someone out there who needs to hear, that things are not as, you're not the only one who's going through. You're not the first person who's going through tough times. You're not the first person who's going through the situation you're going through. I know I'm not. I've had the opportunity, I've had the privilege of seeing people who also have dystonia. So whatever the case is, just realize that the very fact that you're still watching this till now, it's proof that God is not yet done with you. So please subscribe, like the video, and share it. Until we meet again, chin up. God's not done with you yet. Bye.